On May 11, 1996, ValuJet Airlines Flight 592 was a regularly scheduled flight from Miami to Atlanta. There were 110 people on board, 105 passengers, mainly from Florida and Georgia, and a crew of 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants. At 2:04 p.m., the DC-9 airplane took off from runway 9L from Miami International and began a normal climb. At 2:10 p.m., 6 minutes later, the pilots heard a loud bang and the passengers started to smell smoke. The pilots immediately asked air traffic control for a return to Miami due to the increasing smoke in the cockpit and cabin, and were given instructions to return to the airport. At 2:11 p.m., the captain began to turn the plane left in preparation for the return to Miami. However, at 2:12 p.m., inside the cabin, the pilots went quiet, and all you could hear was an eerie silence and the passing wind from outside the plane. Exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds later, Flight 592 disappeared from radar at 2:13 p.m., never to be heard from again. Hi, my name is Daniel Sanchez, and I'm the CEO of DNA Brand Management and the owner of the Miami Brand DeLorean. Welcome to Miami Mysteries series, where we dive deep into the enigmatic stories that surround Miami. In this episode, we're about to uncover the mysterious events surrounding ValuJet Flight 592. Now, ValuJet Flight 592 crashed in the Florida Everglades on May 11, 1996. The plane crashed about 10 minutes after taking off from Miami. All 110 people on board died. The crash remains the deadliest plane crash in Florida history. The official story is the crash was caused by an in-flight fire. The fire was caused by improperly packaged dangerous goods in the cargo area. It was later discovered that expired oxygen generators were illegally shipped in the cargo hold by ValuJet's maintenance contractor, SaberTech. But what really caused this horrible disaster? Were they merely expired canisters? Or was there more to this deadly cargo? Was it a case of foul play or just a chain reaction waiting to happen? And the pilots, did something more sinister cloud their judgment in those crucial moments? Join us as we unravel the mysteries and raise thought-provoking questions about ValuJet Flight 592. What really happened that day, and could there be more to this tragedy than meets the eye? Stay tuned for this captivating episode of the Miami Mystery series. And remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction. To start, let's touch on the backstory of ValuJet. ValuJet Airlines was founded in 1992 and was known for its sometimes aggressive cost-cutting measures. Many of the airline's planes were purchased used from other airlines. Little training was provided to workers, and contractors were used for maintenance and other services. The company quickly developed a reputation for its loose and slack safety. Here's what we mean. In 1986, an American Trans Air McDonnell Douglas DC-10 being serviced at Chicago O'Hare's International Airport had been destroyed on the ground by a fire caused by chemical oxygen generators. On February 3rd of 1988, American Airlines Flight 132, operated by a McDonnell Douglas MD-83, had a similar incident to that which later downed ValuJet Flight 592. A fire began in the cargo hold while the plane was in flight, caused by hazardous materials, but in that case, the crew landed the aircraft safely. In 1995, the U.S. military refused ValuJet's bid to fly military personnel because of the safety worries, and officials at the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, wanted the airline to be grounded. After AA Flight 132, the National Transportation Safety Board recommended to the FAA that all Class D cargo holds have smoke detectors and fire suppression systems. Now let's understand a bit about ValuJet's history with the plane that crashed in the Everglades. The aircraft, a DC-932 registered N904VJ, was the 496th DC-9 assembled at the Long Beach plant. It was 27 years old at the time of the accident and had been previously flown by Delta Airlines. The aircraft had suffered a series of incidents in the 2 years before the crash, including 2 aborted takeoffs and 8 emergency landings. Engine and pressurization errors were the primary issues in several of the incidents. In May 1995, the FAA issued a rewiring directive for all the DC-9 cockpits because the wire bundles in the switch panel could cause fire and uncontrolled smoke throughout the cockpit as a result of chafing and shorting. In the flight deck were two experienced pilots, Captain Candy Quebec, 35, and First Officer Richard Hazen, 52. Captain Quebec had accumulated 8,928 total flight hours throughout her career, including 2,116 hours on the DC-9, and First Officer Hazen had more than 11,800 total flight hours throughout his career, with 2,148 of them on the DC-9. In other words, these were experienced pilots. So far, we understand a few things. ValuJet had very loose and relaxed safety policies, had multiple incidents and emergency landings for similar issues, the plane was tenured and had reported mechanical failures, but we had two very experienced pilots. So now let's go back to the day of the accident. On the afternoon of May 11, 1996, Flight 592 pushed back from Gate G2 in Miami after a delay of 1 hour and 4 minutes due to electrical problems. At 2:04 p.m., the DC-9 took off from runway 9L, now runway 8R, and began a normal climb. At 2:10 p.m., the passengers started to smell smoke. At the same time, the pilots heard a loud bang in their headsets and noticed the plane was losing electrical power. Seconds later, a flight attendant entered the cockpit and informed the flight crew of a fire in the passenger cabin. Passengers' shouts of "fire, fire, fire" were recorded on the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, when the cockpit door was open. Though ValuJet's flight attendant training manual stated that the cockpit door should not be open when smoke or other harmful gases might be present in the cabin, the intercom was not functional, and informing the pilots of what was happening was difficult. The flight data recorder indicated a progressive failure of the DC-9's electrical and flight control systems due to the spreading fire. Quebec and Hazen immediately asked air traffic control for a return to Miami due to the increasing smoke in the cockpit and cabin, and were given instructions for a return to the airport. 1 minute later, Hazen requested the nearest available airport. Quebec began to turn the plane left in preparation for the return to Miami. Flight 592 disappeared from radar at 2:13 p.m., the exact time that it crashed. Eyewitnesses nearby watched as the plane banked sharply, rolled onto its side, and nosedived into Francis S. Taylor Wildlife Management Area in the Everglades, a few miles west of Miami, at a speed in excess of 507 miles per hour. Quebec lost control of the plane less than 10 seconds before impact. Examination of debris suggested that the fire had burned through the floorboards in the cabin, resulting in structural failure and damage to cables underneath the instrument panels. The NTSB report on the accident stated, "The safety board cannot rule out the possibility that the flight crew was incapacitated by smoke or heat in the cockpit during the last 7 seconds of the flight." Now, here are the taped conversations released by the FAA between the Miami International Airport Control Tower and ValuJet First Officer Richard Hazen on May 11th.
Critter 592, contact Miami Center on 13245, so long. Critter 592, contact Miami Center 13245.
592 needs an immediate return to Miami.
Critter 592, roger, turn left heading 270, descend and maintain 7,000.
270, 592.
What kind of problem are you having?
Smoke in the cabin, smoke in the cabin.
Roger.
592, we need a closest airport available.
703. Critter 592, they're going to be standing by for you. You can plan where you want to when able direct to Dolphin now.
Need radar vectors.
Critter 592, turn left heading 140.
140.
Critter 592, you can turn left heading 100 and join the runway 12 localizer at Miami. Critter 592, descend and maintain 3,000. Critter 592, Opelika Airport's about 12 o'clock and 15 miles.
On the third anniversary of the accident in 1999, a memorial was dedicated to the victims in the Everglades. The memorial, consisting of 110 concrete pillars, is located just north of Tamiami Trail, about 12 miles west of Chrome Avenue in Miami-Dade County. It points to the location of the crash site 12 miles to the northeast. Students from the American Institute of Architecture students designed the memorial, and local contractors, masons, and labor unions built it for free. All right, so we're here at the ValuJet Flight 592 Memorial. Now, I want you to put yourself in the mindset of the passengers as they were on this plane in the middle of this fire going down, and then due to the heavy smoke, they all passed out. With that, when you think about, first of all, this catastrophic and again, one of the most deadliest aviation crashes in Florida, and perhaps in the United States, you think about this accident. It was tragic. A lot of lives were lost. However, when you think about the recovery process to try to help out those passengers, if there was any possibility to help them out, you got to think about the men and women, the professionals that really put their life on the line to be able to find them. Let me explain. We're right here, not too far off from the crash when it originally happened back in 1996, but also the efforts that were made by professionals to go ahead and recover the flight recorder box from the airplane. It was absolutely crazy to think that, first of all, they had NASA technology that they were using to try to locate the flight recorder, and they were unable to, due to the fact of all the sawgrass that's there in the Everglades. And you can pan here real quick and take a look at it. All the sawgrass, heavy vegetation that you see block the signal. So essentially, what professionals had to do at this point is go back to human force. So what they did was that they stand at shoulder length from each other with sticks and had to walk through the site, poking down into the marshes to be able to try to locate if there were any bodies, any airplane pieces. So it's extremely difficult because you have alligator-infested waters. You had professionals at times reaching in to the bottom, thinking that they were grabbing onto cables and they would pull up snakes. So you can imagine the amount of effort, the nerve-wracking thoughts that were going through there for anybody that risked their lives to try to recover, from this particular crash site. You also, when it comes to mine, we had riflemen that were out there and would let off shots as warnings if anybody called out for alligators. So it was a huge effort to be able to recover this. And the fact that they couldn't just easily have medical vehicles and transportations just land and come on due to the fact that the Everglades, it's mostly just swamp and a lot of sawgrass. So again, absolutely incredible effort that went here to go ahead and recover it. And I'll give you guys some more details now. Recovery of the aircraft and victims was severely complicated by the location of the crash. The nearest road of any kind was more than a quarter of a mile, 400 meters, away from the crash scene, and the location of the crash itself was a deep water swamp with a floor of solid limestone. The aircraft was destroyed on impact with no large pieces of the fuselage remaining. Sawgrass, alligators, and risk of bacterial infection from cuts plagued searchers involved in the recovery effort. According to the NTSB's report, 2 witnesses fishing nearby testified that they saw a low-flying airplane in a steep right bank. According to these witnesses, as the right bank angle increased, the nose of the airplane dropped and continued downward. The airplane struck the ground in a nearly vertical attitude. They reported seeing no external damage nor any sign of fire or smoke other than the engine exhaust. A group of sightseers in a small private plane also witnessed the crash and provided a nearly identical account, stating that Flight 592 seemed to disappear after hitting the swamp and that they could see nothing but scattered small debris, part of an engine, and a large pool of jet fuel near the crash site. Recovery of the passengers and crew took several weeks, and very few intact human remains were found given the sheer violence of the impact, immersion in swamp water, and scavenging by wildlife. About 68 of the 110 victims were identified, in some cases from examining jawbones, and at least 1 individual from a single tooth. A piece of torn flesh was proven to belong to Hazen, but Quebec's remains were never found. Because of the adverse conditions, performing toxicology tests on the human remains to determine their exposure to fumes and smoke from the in-flight fire was not possible. So something that was very interesting at this point in the investigation and the recovery process is that as the professionals were poking around and recovering pieces from the airplane, what ended up happening is that they found pieces of stainless steel. Now, normally stainless steel isn't used when we're building out aircraft because of the fact that it's too heavy. That's why we use lighter metals like aluminum, titanium. However, stainless steel is very strange to have that. Well, it happened to be, as we found out in the details, that later on when they were recovering canisters in the crash site, they noticed that this was part of the cargo that was on ValuJet Flight 592. So essentially they had canisters, which ended up totaling to being about 140 canisters that were on board here on the plane. So one tends to think, why would 140 canisters be on the plane? And we already know from the details that were recovered from the flight recorder that there was basically a reading, that there was some sort of explosion. So we think about explosion, 140 canisters, and we understand now that as well as they were labeled as expired, but that didn't mean empty. That was actually an assumption that was made.
The NTSB determined that just before takeoff, 144 expired chemical oxygen generators, each slightly larger than the size of a tennis ball can, had been placed in the cargo compartment in 5 boxes marked COMAT, or company material, by ValuJet's maintenance contractor SaberTech in violation of Federal Aviation Administration FAA regulations forbidding the transport of hazardous materials in passenger aircraft cargo holds. Failure to cover the generator's firing pins with the prescribed plastic caps made an accidental activation much more likely. The investigation revealed that rather than covering them, the cords attached to the firing pins were simply cut or duct taped around the cans, and Scotch tape was also used to stick the ends down. SaberTech employees indicated on the cargo manifest that the oxy canisters, which were loosely packed in boxes that were each sealed with tape and bubble wrap, were empty. ValuJet workers then loaded the boxes in the cargo hold in the mistaken belief that the devices that they contained were just empty canisters, thus being certified as supposedly safe to transport on a passenger aircraft, when in fact they were neither simple oxygen canisters nor empty.
So now we have more details. We understand that there was a plane crash. The instruments recorded an explosion, 140 canisters fire on board. But what about the content of the passengers that were on board? Well, what if I told you this? What if I told you that of the 110 passengers that were on board, one was a famous songwriter, another was a famous professional athlete, and another was a prime suspect and fugitive in a murder case?
Notable passengers killed on ValuJet Flight 592 included San Diego Chargers running back Rodney Culver, songwriter and musician Walter Hyatt, and Delmarie Walker, 38, the prime suspect in a murder in Georgia. Detectives in College Park, GA, claimed that 38-year-old Delmarie Walker allegedly stabbed and strangled her friend Catherine Holmes in an argument over money in March 1996. Holmes, 48, was found hogtied with her own stockings and an electrical cord in her apartment. She had 20 stab wounds across her upper body, a sock stuffed in her mouth, and a pillowcase over her head. There was no forced entry, and drinks and a full ashtray on a table in front of the television set indicated to police that she and her killer had been watching TV. Walker denied involvement in the crime and cooperated with the investigation by giving police fingerprints and hair samples. But she balked at giving blood that could be compared with bloodstains found at her friend's apartment. We didn't have enough probable cause to get a search warrant to draw her blood. We didn't have enough to charge her with murder, Police Lieutenant Richard Cromie told a local newspaper. But police say hairs found in the victim's hand, apparently from a struggle with her murderer, later matched those of Walker, as did fingerprints taken from the scene. Walker died in the ValuJet crash weeks later. Police who stayed on the case said they felt confident enough to pronounce the case closed. Now, the last detail about this catastrophic event ends with what the NTSB determined from their investigation of the crash. The NTSB report placed responsibility for the accident on 3 parties: SaberTech for improperly packaging and storing hazardous materials, ValuJet for not supervising SaberTech, FAA for not mandating smoke detection and fire suppression systems in cargo holds as recommended in 1988 after a similar incident. In 1997, a federal grand jury indicted Sabertech for mishandling hazardous materials, failing to train its employees in proper handling of hazardous materials, conspiracy, and making false statements. Sabertech's maintenance supervisor, Daniel Gonzalez, and two mechanics who worked on the plane, Eugene Florence and Mauro Oshil Valenzuela Reyes, were charged with conspiracy and making false statements. 2 years later, having been found guilty on the mishandling hazardous materials and improper training charges, Sabertech was fined $2 million and ordered to pay $9 million in restitution. Gonzalez and Florence were acquitted on all charges, while Valenzuela failed to appear and was indicted in absentia for contempt of court. Valenzuela is still a fugitive as of 2021. He was specifically highlighted in the EPA's announcement of a website to search for environmental fugitives. The FBI has offered a $10,000 reward for information on his whereabouts.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. What really did happen in ValuJet Flight 592? Was it some sort of corporate espionage? Was it some sort of foul play? Did it have to do with a prime suspect in a murder case? Was it really all just an oversight from an airliner that had a history of wrongdoing? Well, we really don't know, and that's the truth. But one thing's for sure, that it's definitely a Miami mystery.